Hi guys. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the extract, A Passage to Africa. So some of the questions that could come up based on that, because I know there is 10 different anthologies, but if we think of possible questions that could come up for each one, possible themes, we can try and predict and plan for it. So consider the questions you could be asked in the exam. So the three that I've chosen is, how does he present his views? So that's quite broad. So for a question like that, you would consider the different feelings that he explores, such as guilt, disgust, sorrow, and pity. So that question is quite broad in the sense there's lots of different things that you could go and explore. Secondly, a typical question that might come up is, how does he present the Somalians? For a question like this, you should consider the different people that he represents. So he does talk about them collectively, but he focuses on the children, the mother, the old woman, the old man. So you would choose which ones you were going to focus on. What you don't want to do is cover as much as possible and mention every single person, because then it's just, you're going to end up summarizing what the extract is about. You're better off choosing 2 or 3 and engaging with that fully. And then lastly, how does he present suffering? For a question like that, you can consider how they suffer internally, mentally, how they suffer physically. You could contrast, say, the young and the old and how they both suffer, maybe in different ways or similar ways. And then some key themes to bear in mind are suffering, death, and poverty. But that's just a few, there might be more than that. So what I've done on these slides is, for 2 of the questions, is I've given an example of what you might talk about. So for question 4 is worth 12 marks, and you should aim to write 3 paragraphs in response to that question. For each paragraph, you then should aim to include roughly 2 quotations. But if you choose quotations that are really strong and that you can pick apart, 2 should be enough for each one. That doesn't mean you might not include other snippets of quotations though. So how does he present his views? So these would be my 3 different paragraphs exploring 3 different points. And what you also need to consider is to ensure that you have focused on language and structure across them. Make sure that you are picking out techniques. So one of the views that he shares you could explore is disgust. So he uses the quotation, the smell of decaying flesh. So the old woman is dehumanized as flesh that is rotting. She's decaying. So the journalist cannot escape the smell, which is so overpowering. In the anecdote, he says that is the first thing that he notices, and that's what actually draws him to her doorway. So he is repulsed, but he is also incredibly sympathetic at seeing people in such conditions. But that's what he is there to report on. He also says it was rotting, she was rotting. So this is the old woman. You could see it in her sick yellow eyes and smell it in the putrid air she recycled. The adjective sick and putrid created a disturbing image of the woman, who is incredibly sick and suffering from a disease. Diseases are infectious, so the idea of the air being recycled, it illustrates how it's such an ongoing cycle and a vicious circle in Somalia, that they're repeatedly going to fall sick and then also infect others. Okay, as well as, that sounds quite harsh that he's disgusted by them, but that is what he says. He's disgusted not with them, but what he is actually seeing and what the extent of what they're suffering. So he's incredibly honest the way that he reports what he's seeing, what happens, which leads to him being very conflicted. So he mentions that while he has pity, he is also revolted by what he is seeing. So he comments, my reaction to everyone I met that day was a mixture of pity and revulsion. He juxtaposes the two. It might seem a harsh word to use to say revulsion, but it also, again, implies he's being honest. He is disgusted by the hunger and disease that they face, and feels insufferable sorrow and pity for them. The abstract noun mixture illustrates the mixed emotions that he has. He is completely powerless, other than by reporting on it and through the power of his words and reaching the public. But at that moment, he likely feels very powerless. Yet, when he meets the old man, which is the first person that he focuses on and really spotlights, he comments that he moves beyond pity and revulsion, and he becomes more in awe of the man who happens to remain so dignified and so human in spite of being in such inhumane conditions. So another feeling, another view that he has is one of guilt. So these quotations are from quite early on in the extract, and he seems almost guilty for his profession. The idea that he is there and he's almost, I mean, you could question, are these pictures exploitive? Being then wanting the most striking picture, the extent of their suffering. And he refers journalism to the ghoulish manner of journalists on the hunt for the most striking pictures. So he compares the search for pictures to a hunt. The adjective ghoulish implies that journalists can be callous and heartless in their search and maybe have little empathy for their subjects, and are more so there for the most shocking pictures, which will then perhaps make the front page, sell the most papers, and thereby make the journalist more money, or have more, have done a more successful job. He also says the search for the most shocking is like the craving for a drug. This simile suggests that the search for the most shocking is addictive and can sometimes be dangerous. It also gives the reader insight into the world of journalism, and again suggests that they are selfish, looking for the main thing that can find to shock and distress readers. One thing I haven't mentioned as much here is writer's intention and a reader reaction. That is again something that you should consider in your responses. So yes, while he wants to shock readers, think about he's also criticizing the nature of journalism. Okay, the second one I'm going to focus on is how he presents the Somalian people. So again, 3 paragraphs exploring 3 different points. For this, how I've broken that down is to focus on 3 different people. Well, the Somalians as a whole, and then 2 people. So the Somalians as a whole, he describes initially as, I saw 1,000 hungry, lean, scared, and betrayed faces. So we've got this hyperbole of 1,000 to emphasize the number of Somalians suffering from famine, poverty, and death. They are visibly suffering, not only physically, but perhaps mentally as well. The using hungry links to their starvation, their physical suffering, but then them being scared and betrayed might suggest that they're quite fearful of the outsiders, or they're angry at those who come and maybe take pictures of them, exploit them by taking pictures of their suffering, but then ultimately leave and in their eyes might not do anything about it. So that's maybe why they feel betrayed. Also, yes, this isn't strictly referring to the people, but it is telling us about how they live. So they live in a ghost town. So they seem to be out in the middle of nowhere, away from civilization. So this simile again could reflect how they're isolated, alone, and left to support themselves. Okay, my second paragraph would be to focus on a key person. So he moves from, and again, this is a structural device, he moves from the Somalians as a whole to then spotlighting on key people that he met. One of which is a mother who loses her children. And he describes the mother as having no rage, no whimpering, just a passing of time. So the repetition of no there empathizes the helplessness of the situation, but also normalizes the suffering of those people. It's pretty devoid of emotion, considering that she's just lost both daughters, which I think, if I'm not wrong, are 9 and 10. The mother is completely powerless and perhaps understood that her daughter's deaths were inevitable. It might be a normal day thing to see in Somalia, which is emphasized through the adjective just. This tells us that the girls, they were disposable. They're just another girl, another child that succumbs to the quiet suffering and death. This quotation here, quiet suffering, is a line that's used also in the extract. So again, that links to them being away from civilization. Yes, they might make the headlines every now and again, but other than that, it is quiet suffering away from the majority of people. It states as well that those girls were in a state of half-life to death itself. So half-life here suggests that the Somalians endure a life in limbo, not quite alive and not quite dead. Because of the extent of their famine, disease, they're in this limbo where death is very frequent, but also inevitable. Okay, then lastly, I chose to focus on the old man. So he is the last person that is focused on in the extract. And I think it creates a shift in tone as well, where we move from these images of incredible suffering and death and brutality, where when it centers on the old man, it almost changes his perspective when this old man smiles. Okay, so towards the end of the article, it says that if the old man was embarrassed to be found weakened by hunger and ground down by conflict, how should I feel to be standing there so strong and confident? So the man smiles at him when he's there, and the reporter is questioning that smile. And someone says, oh, well, he's embarrassed for you to see him in this way. So that smile stands out to him amidst the death, the suffering, the hunger, he poses this rhetorical question. Since the man is embarrassed to be found in such a weakened state, the author almost seems in awe of his ability to have such pride and dignity, despite the living conditions that he faces. The juxtaposition of the old man's weakness to the reporter's strength is ironic though. Okay, if you think physically, the reporter is stronger. The reporter seems to be suggesting that the old man, despite being physically weak, is maybe perhaps mentally stronger. When he questions, how should I feel? He seems to suggest that he should be the one embarrassed by standing there and taking these pictures when he's fit and healthy. Okay, what I would do for now, your own revision, is to practice creating this for yourself, but for the question on the theme of suffering. So do the same, practice 3 paragraphs, exploring 3 different points, ensuring that you are identifying techniques and analyzing them. The technique here on the last slide will show you exactly what you have to do for full marks in this question. So notice that at every level, though, you need to be identifying features of language and structure. How you will move up the levels is how strong your analysis is of those techniques. Right, okay, good luck with that, guys. I hope that helped.